Canada must be a country of freedoms, and all the freedoms must be protected by law.
These words were spoken by George Etienne Cartier, one of the fathers of Canadian political thought. But are they still relevant in Stephen Harper's Canada today? 6 months ago, CUTV started investigating the formation of the Gamma Squad here in Montreal. They were a squad of policemen dedicated to investigating marginal groups and anarchists. Their first act was to arrest 4 members of the CLAC after a May Day demonstration. A month later, in July 2010, they arrested 4 members of the Quebecois student group ACÉ for staging 2 peaceful sit-ins in the offices of the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Education. The ACÉ members were arrested 1 month after the demonstrations. From the discovery that the Crown turned over, they're absolutely certain that both their phones and emails were monitored. In doing our research, what we found is that the Gamma Squad is not isolated to Montreal. This is part of a Canada-wide network set up in 2002 by Assistant Commissioner Gilles Michaud to the RCMP. We interrupt this report to bring you an explanation for the tide of acronyms we're throwing at you. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police were formed in 1873, a quasi-military national police force. They had responsibility for national domestic security until the 1970s, when they were fired for impersonating terrorists. CSIS was formed in 1984 to replace the Royal Canadian Mounted Police in the national security role. It was handy for the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and money-saving for the Canadian government in that most of the ex-RCMP officers who first formed CSIS didn't even have to move desks, they just turned in their guns. INSET, the Integrated National Security Enforcement Team. This is the bureaucratic cover under which the RCMP got back into the domestic security business. The JIG, or Joint Intelligence Group, is an ad hoc group comprising the RCMP, CSIS, National Defense Security Intelligence, and your local police. ISUs, or Integrated Security Units, are the structures set up by the government at all major events, including the G20 and the Olympics. Thank you. We now return you to your report. Now, the RCMP were banned from doing domestic surveillance work after the MacDonald and Keeble commissions of the 1970s found that the RCMP routinely used illegal actions. Between 1970 and 1973, 80% of the FLQ incidents here in Quebec were actually committed by members of the RCMP in order to keep their national security budgets up. The RCMP snuck back into the national security business in 2002 with the setting up of the INSET program, or Integrated National Security Enforcement Team. This program was started by Assistant Commissioner Gilles Michaud to the RCMP after he graduated from the anti-terrorism course in Quantico, Virginia, run by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. These teams are in every city in Canada and provide a seamless bureaucratic integration between CSIS, the RCMP, Border Security, National Defense Intelligence, and your local police. In this report, we will see how many of our rights here in Canada are still guaranteed by law.
There's been a discussion about the Gamma project, which was settled because of the problematic that we had at that time, talking about protests that were going on in Montreal. And during that project, we've been sharing infos with RCMP SQ. All the resources were put together, so it was very easily done for us. It was a plus for us.
And was it vital to the Gamma project to have that integration with the C Division INSET, experienced personnel, access to resources to carry out that type of a national security investigation?
Yeah, and the whole purpose of that, just to make sure that we're not working by ourselves without knowing what's going on for our neighbors, for instance. Yes, you're talking about Montreal. Montreal is an island, but you got Longueuil, you got Laval, you got the Quebec instance, and the national one. So imagine, for instance, you're working on some possible suspects, and you don't share the info with RCMP or SQ. That would have been like working blind without knowing what was going on. So yes, it was vital for us to share the info.
How integrated is the RCMP with CSIS?
We do collaborate on a day-to-day basis. We have exchanges of resources from the service to the RCMP and the RCMP to the service. The purpose of these exchange of personnel is basically to afford our respective agencies the understanding and knowledge of how the other agency works, why and how they do their things, so that we can continue to collaborate effectively. We do have, under the Security Offences Act, the RCMP has basically primacy over all national security criminal investigations. So when a police of local jurisdiction investigates or is able to establish that what they're investigating is violence in relation to either a political, ideological, or religious motive, okay, that would fall within the CSIS definition of a national security threat. That is one that the RCMP-led integrated units, the INSETs that you referred to, would step in. That being said, the INSET on its own, it is integrated. It is integrated because we have police forces of local jurisdictions that are on board. That's why the word integrated exists there. So this is done in a very seamless way.
Talking about the Montreal Police Service, this is the kind of intelligence that the Montreal Police Service was the primary agency to get it, because we're working on the field. We get that info. We share that with the RCMP, we share that with the SQ on the national level.
You know, the McDonald Commission recommended the creation of CSIS because the RCMP has, it's not the finest part of the RCMP's history. It's dealing with internal dissent. In the course of my research, I came across an ISU JIG intelligence memo, and it listed as threats at the G8, and I would assume the same would be for the Olympics or any other kind of event. First, terrorism, obviously, you know, large-scale acts committed by extremists. But secondly, it listed threats to public order. And under what it listed as threats to public order, it interested me that it included practical or theoretical objections to capitalism, mixed market economy, free trade environment, animal rights, First Nations, which would have been an issue at the 2010 Olympics, gender, racial equality, distribution of wealth. I mean, aren't you actively gathering?
No, we're not monitoring. No,
to ascertain whether they have criminal intentions or not. Would that not be part of it?
No, we're not monitoring the activities of these groups unless we have allegations or information that would lead us to believe that they're up to criminal activities.
As it is now, with the actual policy of the government, of the Harper government, you never know what they can do, because they tend to consider you as a threat to national security, so they say, because you organize in order to have more rights to be recognized as you should be as a Canadian citizen, or not still yet a Canadian citizen.
The origins of policing in Canada, the forerunner of the RCMP was the Northwest Mounted Police. They were created basically to quell Métis and Indigenous uprising on the prairies. The RCMP and the RCMP Security Service played a crucial role in monitoring and disrupting any sort of Native militancy in Canadian history. If we fast forward a bit to the 1910s and 20s and 30s, the labor movement and communist movements were monitored and disrupted. That was the role of policing. That was the role of undercovers, of security agencies, and what have you. Recently it was revealed that the Canadian government operated a program called PROFUNC, which was a program meant to monitor and eventually arrest and detain, if needed, communist functionaries. We have in the 50s and 60s and even into the 70s the Red Scares. We have evidence of monitoring of peace movement, of all kinds of movements. And in Quebec in particular, there's a very unique history, because the RCMP Security Service was involved in trying to disrupt sovereigntist movements. It's because of some of their abuses, like burning barns, false communiques, false bombings, that there was commissions of inquiry, and basically the security service function of the RCMP was taken out, and CSIS was created in 1984. So you have CSIS, but the idea of police running undercovers and special squads and the rest of it and monitoring political movements, that still continues. With the recent in 2010, we had the Olympics and the G8 and G20 happening in Canada, and we have ample evidence through freedom of information requests and also through the disclosure related to the people who were charged with various G20 offenses, and I was charged in G20 offenses. We have clear evidence of policing agencies running undercovers. The RCMP had 12 across the country.
Sometimes democracy is kind of unruly looking, demonstration like the G8 or like the upcoming Occupy Montreal for the Occupy Wall Street. Mm-hmm. How do you set that line to ensure that you don't cross over into stifling legitimate political dissent?
Again, the line that separates that is basically the criminal activity, a criminal activity per se. Okay, if it is not, if the groups, associations, or individuals are there expressing their views on issues, the RCMP does not investigate that. We don't do that. All right, we don't do that.
According to the proof that our lawyers have right now, well, according to the proof we have, it's clearly sure that they are already listening to our conversations, reading our text messages, reading our emails, and according to the questions that they asked to our militants that were arrested, we have asked our hébergeur, the hébergeur of our site web, of our website, to tell us from which server does the most visit come from to our website, and it's the server of the SPVM for maybe 2 or 3 months. So we know they are already listening to us, they are reading our message, reading our websites, reading our emails. So yeah, they are already using those tactics.
How do you feel that the new omnibus crime legislation includes legislation to allow police access to people's internet providers, cell phone providers? How do you feel that's going to affect civil liberties in Canada?
Well, it's a huge attack on civil liberties. I mean, there's 2 specific things here. There's the omnibus crime bill, but there's also all these new internet privacy measures, and they go hand in hand. It's basically giving more power and a lot more discretion to policing agencies in the state. It gives the police a huge amount of powers to be invasive in our day-to-day lives.
As we've seen in this report, Canada has formed its own Homeland Security Department without the need for bothersome legislation. And the security apparatus is increasingly being used against social movements here in Canada. For more information, check these links. In our next report, we're going to look at CSIS's history of illegality here in Canada. This is William Ray for CUTV News.